Ladies and gentlemen, Mr. President, on behalf of Nestle, and if I dare to say also our co-organizers for this event, UNCTAD, who is presented here by its Secretary General, Mukisha Kitui, I would like to give you a very warm welcome and to thank you very much for having accepted to be with us today at the 6th Global Creating Shared Value Forum. So after having started these forums, which we do once a year in New York, and then went to London, Washington, and afterwards India, last year to Cartagena in Colombia, we decided to bring it home to where it all started, which is in Switzerland. And we are, of course, therefore very honored that you participate in this forum. And I think it is a clear sign that you share our conviction that business can and should play a positive role in trying to solve the problems of society of today. Of course, we are not doing it alone. We don't pretend that. We know very well that for that we have to work with all stakeholders, with governments, NGOs, academia, and multilateral organizations in order to be able to address some of these pressing issues, not at least related also to water, which we are going to about to discuss in the panel. You personally have shown admirable personal leadership on the water topic, if I can say so, not only during your presidency, but also before, and you have articulated a strong position for Switzerland in the water side. The first thing, you are calling for a world in which the equitable management of water promotes a sustainable development in all the regions of the world. The second one is a call for recognition of the human right to water. In New York last September, you called for a sustainable development goal dedicated to water, and all of those ambitions, as you know, I share very, very much. So, Mr. President, once again, thanking you for being with us this afternoon. I hope you will find our discussion stimulating, interesting, and we are, of course, very much looking forward to hearing your own views on the topic after the panel had the opportunity to discuss, and more broadly, perhaps, on the changing role of business in society. So thank you very much for being with us today.
So now let's welcome to the stage our panelists for this fourth session, which is on water scarcity. Can we solve it? I call on As Si, Secretary General of the International Federation of Red Cross and Red Crescent Societies, Margaret Catley-Carlson, patron of the Global Water Partnership, Alexander Zenda, founder and chairman of Triple Z. Would you come and join us, please, on the stage? Thank you very much. Now, let me just see where you're all sitting. Maggie, I think you're sitting right here, one further up, closer. Unless you are afraid of sitting next to Pete, exactly.
Be able to read in this panel?
Yes. Well, I was just wondering who the empty chair was for. So, again, as usual, just a few provocative questions at the start. The title of the session is Water Scarcity, Can We Solve It? So one of the questions that I think right at the start we need to look at is, why isn't water really valued? Why isn't value everywhere put on water? Another one is, at the same time, if water shortages are part of a function of, as we know, the cost of bringing clean water from source to consumer, how, at the same time, can we safeguard the human right to water, particularly among the poorest? And a third one, if sustainable agricultural water use is the single largest factor in assuring water security, and the pricing of water, as we know in agriculture, is at very best somewhat erratic, what strategies should we be looking at without engendering an unduly adverse impact on food security and food costs, as we discussed at the last session? So there's a few of the questions I think that we should look at. And Secretary General, I'd like to start with you. Asi, you have written about, you have talked about equitable, affordable access to water. And all three, equitable, affordable, and access. My question to you is, to what extent? Are you talking about agriculture as well in that? Or are you talking mostly about a pro-poor approach for human rights? What do you mean by that?
Thank you very much. I think I'm talking about all of the above. If you live in an arid or semi-arid land, like the region I'm coming from, your life, your way of life, and your livelihood is all shaped by water and access to water. It is then what is driving nomadic and pastoralist communities, through an itinerary of survival, to see how they can access to livelihood and then water their animals. It is also what is driving, the fact that, farmers be in one place or the other at a given point in time, of the year. If you are a rural woman in the majority of the villages of the world, your whole life is also, goes on the rhythm of access to water. Mm-hmm. When to go to fetch water. Mm-hmm. The water point, being the place sometimes, where women meet, learn from each other, counsel each other. But the way to it, 1 mile to that point, or 100 meters to a point, or the point right in your house, can be a matter of life and death, depending, on, the opportunities or, the lack of opportunities you have. As I said before, it is a source of life because we cannot do without it. And those who call for human rights, as related to water, I think it is one of the most pertinent things we can hear. It can also be a source of either conflict of stability or stability that we need also to pay attention to. And of course, today we're talking about the scarcity, of water, and it is not infinite, and we have to make sure that at the end point, the users have to contribute to it, or somebody has to pay to it. I don't have a problem that somebody has to pay to it, because it has a cost. But if we want to have an equal access and a sustainable access, to water, there is no way that the majority of the people living on this earth, and then who need it most, will have access to it with any pay at any level. If a gallon of water was only costing half a cent, the majority of the poor will not even access that. Now, it calls then on collective responsibility on management of water, and then we learn a lot about that. But what we do not talk about quite often is the governance of water resources. Because the governance of water resources will call for choices. And it is a governance choice, to decide if the water is going to be watering the flowers, that will be boarding the plane at night and then go, to the fresh tables in the restaurants of Europe or the United States. Or it is that same water source which is going to be, for agriculture, to satisfy the basic needs. Is it also the governance of water that will give you a clear choice? That we take water, from the poorest areas in a country through big pipes, to provide water with the urban settings. Mm-hmm. And then we are surprised, when the pastoralists, break those pipes because they are thirsty, or they break them because their animals cannot access water. So I think, to respond to your question, we have to make sure that it is accessible, that it is safe, that it is affordable. And that if we do that, it is a contribution to agriculture, of course, and then food production and health and nutrition. If we do so, it is going to be also a contribution to stability, because going to the same water point and then fetching the water at the same place, in many parts of the world, this may be the only thing that people will have in common, to build a social capital to work from and then to work on.
Secretary General, one of the questions that you have touched on, I would like very much to elaborate with the panel here, and you call it the governance of water. There's the governance and the management, and I would very much like to ask you all to think about who's in charge of what, where, when, how. How does that work? There is the global picture, then there is a regional aspect, and a very local one. So if in your responses now to some questions, if you could think about a little bit the issue that you have raised, Asi, which is the governance, but also I raise the management as well. So, Maggie, what is holding back the implementation of a lot of solutions that over the last years, a lot of approaches, I would say, more even than solutions, that over the last year have become very well known, well designed. There are even examples of it. What is holding back that we are actually implementing? Because we all realize that there is a serious problem here. We're not talking about something that will happen very far in the future. It's here with us now. So could you tell us a little bit about how we can approach getting those solutions, those managements, those governance in place?
Okay. Well, there's a lot of things holding us back because water is so many things to so many people. But one of them is just taboos. I mean, we could do a great deal more about reuse and recycling. But there are taboos that go into operation, and many cities have had the experience of putting together fairly expensive and extensive and well-functioning systems, only to have them almost catapulted or sometimes completely destroyed by somebody saying, we're going to be drinking the same water as the toilet. Well, yes, we are, but I mean, the moment the toilet is drinking the same water as we are, that's the main problem. And usually we gather together the water, we purify it, we keep it, we pen it, we pipeline it, and then we use 37% of it in North America to flush toilets.
Yeah, wow.
So the taboo of at least splitting up and changing that process is one of the major things. Myths are another thing. I hate to disagree with the Secretary General, but I think people will pay for water, not immediately and not the first time, but I think survey after survey and experience after experience shows that people are much more willing to pay for water than governments are to charge them. I remember talking to Indian politicians who said, it's really easy not to get elected in India. You just say that you're going to increase water prices. The myth of people not being willing to pay stops a lot of governments or managers, to use your phrase, from moving ahead to actually doing something about this. We can all help in the sense that we persist in talking about the cost and the price for water. If you want to make one contribution to water governance and water management in your life, never, ever, ever, you talk about the cost or the price of water again. Talk about the cost and the price of water services. Because the minute you talk about water services, you're talking about irrigation equipment, you're talking about pipes, you're talking about chemicals, you're talking about all the things that go into it. If you talk about water, people imagine the raindrops coming out of the sky. So, you can do something about improving that. So money, power, if you're in a full-up situation, which in a world of 7.2 billion, we're getting pretty full, and you have to make room for 9 billion coming with all the water we're going to need for food, for all the rest of it, somebody's got to move over. And this is not a message that governments like very much. Please, Mr. Minister, would you like to tell somebody that they need to use a lot more, they need to use a lot less water, and by the way, whether they do or don't, we're going to charge them more for it. And by the way, could we have 10 billion euros to fix the sewers? So, water is not a great political subject. It's wonderful to talk about on platforms, but when it comes down to actually being the manager for water or the governor for water, there's a lot of things in there that really aren't that much fun. So there's a few reasons as to why it's difficult and tough to actually do both the governance and the management, but we can all help by talking about water services and then talking about...
So tell me, where do we begin, from which end do we begin to dispel the mythologies around it? If we can't jump right in to the actual implementation of what you've just said, that is, the actual implementation by governments, especially in democratic countries where they have to be elected, to get water services charged the right amount, to change habits, to work on the practicalities of the management of our water systems. How do we get across, to begin with, that water has a value? Leave aside the word cost, but that it has a value. How do we get that message across?
I would rather talk about the places that have actually jumped in and done it.
So tell me who has done it right.
China has given water to almost all of its people and sanitation to a very large number too, and people pay for it. South Africa made this a constitutional point after the apartheid regime ended. It gave an amount of water that was free, but the amount over and above that to everybody had to be paid for. So, and there's been problems about it and disputes, and various governments have had to regulate those things. Morocco gives water to all of its people, and they pay for it. So the idea that it's impossible to make this happen is simply incorrect. And what we've got to do, I think, rather than scratching our heads about how we get people to value this thing which we all use and need and all the rest of it, let's get on with studying success. We obsess over failure. We don't study success. So less obsession, more studying, and the application of success models. And thank you to our president here, who is in favor of the single goal for water. So that may bring some success as well.
Thank you very much, Maggie. Professor Zenda, Sasha, let's talk with you a little bit about the implementation of management of water, the implementation of decision-making. As Maggie said, we do know some of the steps. Some people have done them. We make policies, we make strategies and so on, and sometimes this comes a cropper in the actual implementation of decision-making. Can you tell us why and what we should be doing differently?
Well, let me start just by going back what Maggie just said. The price is not the price for water, it's the price for the services to deliver water and to take it out of your house. It's both. And if we calculate that for an OECD country, it's approximately somewhere between $4 and $6 per cubic meter, and with this you cover everything. Now, $4 to $6 dollars per cubic meter sounds extremely expensive. But I can tell you, the poorest people, they pay more than that when they go to the street vendor of the water. That means once you look at the price per cubic meter, but if they go there per liter, over the time they use it, it's actually much more expensive. How much water do we need? Approximately to drink, first for drinking, 1 cubic meter in temperate zones per year and person, 3 cubic meter in tropical areas per year and person, just for the drinking, not hygiene and all the things together. Right. That's affordable, even if it costs $4 to $6 per cubic meter for everybody. Now, why are we not able to implement that? So, because everything is actually basically, you look down and it looks all straightforward. We have to understand water is different. And water is emotional, and almost only emotional. You cannot approach water intellectually, because that goes wrong. It's not like selling bananas and fruits. Water is supporting our life. It is a question of life or death, and people feel that. And if we go back, all the religions, water plays an important role. Wherever you go, water has not only a value, but water has values. And that complicates, actually, at the end of the day, to find a solution. And what you see in many places around the world is that governments would like to bring in a solution for water. And it goes wrong. Why does it go wrong? It's because the government can put in the policy. That's where they are for. But they are not able to actually implement the policy because they are driven by the daily politics. And daily politics basically is never transparent. And if you are not transparent in an emotional issue, you will lose. So my position is always when I go to a politician and say, come, keep your hands off the water. Give it to an agency, arm length of the government. They should implement it. If something goes wrong, you fire the CEO. It's easy. But no, everybody would like to be bringing the solution to everybody out in field. So we have to see that water has to be treated totally different because of this emotional value. And all the treatments about water have to be absolutely transparent and don't lose anybody on the way until you take the decision. So it's very, very important.
Now, thank you for putting it in that framework. We are going to be coming up eventually against sort of a hard reality, is the way that I would put it, in different countries at different times. And so it's going to be necessary that something gives, either the management side, the governance side, the change of people's habits. Something is going to give, or the payment for services. So we have almost a tragedy in the making here, because if we've got this demand for water, which you have written about, Peter, so much. Here's all your blog. I read it. It's fascinating what you say, but it's also a little scary at times. Demand for water is set to rise by 50% in 15 years, the demand for water. This is, in some places, is going to be a tragedy in the making, because as you have written, it's a human right. So how are you proposing that we get out of this, so that we foresee this problem, this hard wall that some countries, not everywhere, but some are going to be up against at some point soon?
Well, first of all, I would say that I think the panel spontaneously brought forward the argument which makes the discussion about water not optional.
Not optional.
You know, we can discuss about climate change, but we have no time to discuss about water, because the water problem is here today. I don't have to wait 100 years and perhaps and not and perhaps this and perhaps that. The reality is, even without climate change, we are using today 10% more of water what is sustainable available. And we are taking it away basically from the environment, and that's why we have the lakes drying out, and we know all the Aral Lake and the Lake Chad. We have 5 of the biggest rivers not bringing any water anymore to the sea. It's not a question about whether we want to discuss.
It's there.
It's here.
Yeah.
It's today. And those people who are in the water-stressed areas, it's a daily aspect of life and death. And therefore, when the Secretary General said, yes, wonderful, water is the source of life. Yes, but water is also the biggest source of death today. And I'm just surprised what it takes more before the public opinion wakes up to this reality. You know, it's very interesting. We just had the case in California, okay? Well, there's a big discussion whether one should use water in order to put it in a bottle for human consumption, or whether this water should go to the 10 or 20 golf courses, which one of them uses more water than what a full bottled factory is using it in. No, come on. So what do we need more in order to wake up to reality of today? You know, and I think this is one of the subjects which we are trying to bring forward to make people understand. Now, the next thing which is going to happen is, as we are not solving this problem by now, and as water is being the most important, it's quintessential for food production and energy production, we are going to have a major impact on the food security.
Both of those, yeah.
So by going on like we are going to lose about 30% of the total cereal production of the world in the next 10 years, okay? Because we will not have the water. Now, then perhaps we will wake up.
But tie that in also to your concern about the issue of food waste, because we have a lot of factors working now on the water.
Yeah, when we are talking about food waste, we're already talking about solutions.
Yes.
Okay? Let me just perhaps one aspect say before. You see, this emotional part that Sasha was talking about, it is not resistant to a factual analysis.
No, that's
what we are using, and Sasha mentioned it, what we are using for the human right of water corresponds to 1.5% of the total water withdrawal. 1.5%. So this is not the problem. This is not the issue. The issue is that governments are not assuring the access to this human right nowhere. But let's not confound this 1.5% with the 98.5% where we are just giving no value to the water that we have. That's basically our discussion we have all the time. And without giving value, and I also insist on value, because price is only one way of giving value.
I agree.
It's not the only one.
Right.
There are many other ones. It was mentioned good examples. You mentioned South Africa. Mm-hmm. I think a wonderful solution where the first 6,000 liters of water per month are free for a family, free, okay? This is assuring the human right. But every liter you're using afterwards for your washing the cars, for sprinkling your garden, has a price. And more importantly, which was the most difficult part to bring forward when this reform was done, is the more you use, the higher the price. You see, you have to change economy of scale. Economy of scale is a wrong concept. It's still being taught at universities. It's absolutely wrong. When you are talking about rare resources, economy of scale is the biggest mistake that you can have. You should have a diseconomy of scale. The less you use, the less you should be paying. The more you use, each time the incremental value should have a higher price. This would be a very simple thing. Okay.
And so what's holding us up?
Well, it's holding us up is emotion. Emotion. Basically, it's emotional part. You are not allowed. I mean, here I'm allowed without receiving a lot of booze. But, you know, I talked in Lucerne at the Human Rights Convention. Well, the whole thing almost went up in flame.
But you are.
Just because I was talking about something and tried to be factual.
Yeah,
but
emotionally
it's not there. So emotion is the biggest one. The taboos and myths are the biggest obstacles that we have. But we will overcome them.
Yes.
Not because we will be intelligent enough to do it.
Because we'll have to.
We will have to. And I think it's a pity
that
we are going to push more and more people into extreme positions. Yeah. And extreme position for me is finally death. Because we are not able to discuss today on a factual basis.
Right. But even, it's very interesting that you say that, you know, you get these emotional reactions from people, even when you say that we are not talking about the survival factor of water. That part we're not talking. It's all the rest. And even then, which is not an emotional part, there is a whole part of this that should not be emotional. I agree that when you bring up the subject of water itself, at first it's a very emotional thing. But is there any way in which, and some countries have done it, some areas have done this, which is separate the part that's emotional, which you're saying is the absolute fundamental right of everyone, which you have just said, given even a number to it, from the rest of the use. Where it becomes tricky, though, and this is the question I will put to you, is that in parts of the world, the water use for the animals, for the fodder, for the secondary part, which is the agricultural part, the secondary to the first emotional use to keep myself alive part, is at this time, and excuse me, Secretary General Assi, for saying this, is often misused because government policies are very wasteful, are very incorrect, are mismatched. I remember when we were 2 years ago in New Delhi, do you remember that extraordinary picture that we saw? I have to tell those who weren't here, of a farmer standing knee-deep in water on a completely flooded field. This did not come from a monsoon. This came because government policies on energy say that at night, the electricity bill goes down. So before he goes to sleep, the farmer turns his pump on. He goes to sleep and just leaves it going because there's no value to the water that he's getting. And the next day he comes and he's standing in completely flooded fields, embarrassed. So there is somewhere along the way a responsibility beyond the emotion, isn't it? That governments and perhaps also in some way civil society, NGOs, and businesses need to actually take up that responsibility and not lament. I don't know, but I'm asking you, how will that work? Asi.
Yeah, first of all, I think for me, nothing wrong about emotion. It is, it puts you in motion. It moves you to do something. You know, an emotion that paralyzes, that is something else. But, you know, if you're moved by something that leads you to action, that is good. And I don't think, you know, the emotion of around water is an emotion that paralyzes, because it does not leave anybody cold. People want to do something about it. That's one thing. The second is that I think it's good to segment a little bit the discussion, because if we talk about, you know, water to wash cars, you know, to water golf courses, you know, all the way down, you know, to survival strategies, that's not the same. It is a whole different ballgame. You know, in my world of work, and then the communities, you know, that we are active in those regions, it is a survival strategy, you know, around water. And in those countries, all those countries also we mentioned, we have all those different categories that we need to segment. I mean, if you are on the Table Mountains, you know, of Cape Town, your water needs and your capacity to pay is very different, you know, as when you walk down 1 mile to Kailicha Township. Those are two worlds in South Africa. If you're on the high rise on Soweto, on Sandton City, and then you look down to Soweto and Alexandra, your perception of water and water needs and capacity to access and pay for it is completely different. If you live in the comfortable place, you know, called Runda in Nairobi, and then you look all the way down to Kibera, which is the biggest slums, you know, in the world today, or you go up to Dadaab, which is now a city, fourth largest city in a country which is composed of Somali refugees. And then you see in peak seasons, you know, that children in front of your eyes, you know, dying because of dehydration, of lack of water. Of course, then there is an emotional thing. And, can I finish?
Yes.
Of course, there is then an emotional situation. And the majority of those populations, you know, we're talking about the measurement that we have in our development world. We're talking about the number of the millions of people who are living on less than $1 a day, you know, which is one indicator which is now taken and everybody's using it in a kind of a measurement. And I think we have to question at one point in time, you know, the humanity or the world we want to live in, if the indicator is, you know, how much, you know, live, you know, around $1 or less, you know, a day. And in that context, for me, that is the context I'm coming from, that I'm discussing, and then that is, you know, the communities, because we're talking about equity, we're talking about sustainable use and an access to water for the poorest, you know, of the poor, and then the most marginalized. And then for those, I'm saying, and this is not a myth, for those I'm saying, you know, if it was only half a cent, not the dollars we're talking about to access it, we will live in a world that we will leave so many people out and then dying because not, you know, access to water. Now, I mentioned governance, not of water. I think that's where I think we can meet. But what we see in many of the countries that you have, you know, two parallel systems. You have what we call a formal setting of governments and then governance, which exclude de facto, you know, large numbers of population. So governance which is now responding, you know, to all the needs of citizens and then redistributing resources, you know, so that, you know, the services are paid and then it is modulated depending on the needs as well as on the capacity, you know, to pay. That is an ideal situation we would like to see. That level of good governance
We're not there yet.
does not exist in most of the countries, including the ones that are being cited as good examples, because it is exactly in those very countries that you see the biggest disparities on earth. The disparity between rich and poor, the disparities between men and women, the disparities between the rural and the urban settings. And this is now the recipe then for disaster, if we do not address that. Because choices, have to be made, on what would be then prioritized, and water is something that we cannot, go without. It will be squarely, in the middle of it. While there may be many aspects, I don't want to disagree or challenge of what, myth and reality is. But reality of many people in the world, it is a strategy for survival on a daily basis on how to fetch water, strategy of survival on a yearly basis that will be marking your life, your livelihood, and your way of life.
Maggie, you wanted to?
Yeah, you and I both went through UNICEF and worked on water. I've worked in a dozen water organizations, including the Global Water Partnership. I've spent a lot of time in my life looking at the water needs of exactly that 800 million people. But there's another 6.1 billion people in the world, and they are not living on $1.50 a day, and they are using water for a lot of purposes. And frankly, I think the water discussion gets hijacked by the fact that we bring up the 800 million people, and as I say, believe me, every word you've said goes straight to my heart, but we can't discuss the future world uses of water if we concentrate, or if we assume that the paradigm that exists for these 800 million people, which the Secretary General has just outlined very, very well, if we assume that that's the paradigm that we've got to talk around, we've got to talk about water as an economic good. Who is using water as an economic good, how you treat it, how you monitor it, how you meter it, how you do all of the things that you can do with technology. We've got to talk about how we reuse that water. And we really need to separate the acute needs of people living in abject poverty. Because if we discuss water as if that was the totality of the picture, we simply won't get to the kind of reforms that we need.
But that's my perspective.
Okay,
others can talk about the other.
No, on est d'accord.
Yes. The problem, though, that I think we're up against, Secretary General, is if we do not make that separation, if we do not look at the things in the context in which we could, well, not segmented, but in the context in which they occur, your 800 million are going to be the first to suffer. And that is, to me, the tragedy.
Yeah, and that's the point Peter's been trying to make for the last 10 years.
That's the point that you keep trying to hammer at us again and again, is that we cannot take as an excuse that we don't do something about it, the right for the 800 million to get the absolute necessity. That we can give as a given, we can take as a given, rather. But that has prevented many people and many governments and many well-thinking and well-meaning groups to not take action for the rest.
And that's what I meant by myth and things like that, not that
that to me seems to be the challenge in front of us of how to get it done. Almost single-handedly, many people like yourself, Peter, are trying to move it, the President too, but tell us.
Yeah, but I think the first thing we would have to do, and I think everybody agrees,
microphone, please,
to recognize water as a human right. If we do that, if we all agree, and I don't know anybody who is not agreeing with that, okay? Well, then we are talking about the 1.5% of water that we are needing, and we have to think about what has to be done in order to assure that this human right is being delivered to the totality of the population of the world, and not only to a part of the population, okay? This is one challenge. And I think one of the things why we have insisted that in the development goals, we have a single point of water is to assure that there's an universal access to truly safe and not only improve drinking water by 2025 for everybody. But this is one thing. Let's put this aside, let's put this agree, let's make governments responsible for that, okay? Now let's talk about the 98.5%.
Yes.
But as long as you're mixing these two things all the time, over and over again, we will be back on the emotional side.
Exactly.
And you were asking whether there are examples. I mean, for me, one of the most exciting examples is Phnom Penh in Cambodia. Who would ever have thought that one man who assumed the water management, and I don't even know whether he was a politician, he had just assumed the leadership of the water agency.
No, he's a military guy.
A military guy, okay? He was able to have the most efficient drinking water supply almost in the world. After Singapore, I think Phnom Penh is now number 2. Now, the question then immediately comes a question up, well, in order to do what you are saying, water has to be privatized, which is another of this emotional stuff.
Of course.
Never have I said the water has to be privatized. What I'm saying is water management has to be efficient. 97% of total water supply today is in public hand. 3% is in private hand. Both sides are not efficient, frankly speaking. Because if I look at the loss in London with 35% in the water supply, I don't think this is sufficient when the Mr. Military in Phnom Penh can make 5.2%. Okay, of water waste, and in London we have, which is privatized company. So I don't think it's a matter of privatization or not privatization. It's a matter of efficient management.
That's why I say there's the governance side and there's the management. I'll come to you, Sasha, just a minute. I wonder if we could go back. We've had thousands of posts from Twitter here, but one of them I want to bring up is this one from webcast question from Nazish Shekhar in Pakistan. Communities in Sindh faced interlinked issues because of climate change, water scarcity, and disease. Could public-private partnerships help private sector to learn about interlinkages of food security and livelihood development, also in the context of climate change? And of course, we're talking about the impact that has on water. Something to keep in mind. Very glad if anyone wants to look at it. Sasha, I'll come to you. Do you want? You don't have to answer it.
This is important, and I would just go further what Peter said. Peter said, you know, we talk about this 1.5, and that's from this 1.5%, and waterborne diseases, which is the biggest killer around the world, are on this 1.5%. We know how to handle that. We have the technology, adaptive technology, simple technology. We have everything. It's a question of willingness to do it. I'm flat about that. And you see around the world where you have this willingness to do it, it's done.
It's done.
Take the example, almost extreme. Singapore has decided water is the number one priority politically. There is nothing higher than water. And what they have done, the best water management in the world. I don't say that everywhere in the world it has to go the same direction, but it has to stay there, and it has not to be influenced by the daily politics. It has to stay at number one. So this is important, and this is what we are not discussing. And then I would like to come back, what Peter actually said also, is we should talk about this 98.5%. And let me give you just a few numbers to make you feel bad when you eat some food this evening. You know, to produce 1 kilogram of bread, to grow it, you need at least 1 cubic meter of water, factor 1,000. If you want to eat something else than only bread, and you would like to put some meat on the bread, if you want to have the same energy out of meat than we would have out of the bread, it takes you 10 times more, which means 10 cubic meters of water. There is where the water is going. Now, we had in the panel before saying Africa is going to feed the world.
Yeah.
I'm sorry.
Not sure.
I have to damp a little bit your enthusiasm. All the modeling, what we have been doing in the last 10 years, shows that Africa will not feed the world. We will have 5 countries which can overproduce in such large amounts that it can actually send around food. It's 5 countries. Unfortunately, it's none of the developing countries. It's the US, it's Canada, it's Argentina, it's France, and it's Australia. That's it. And everybody says, well, Brazil will come. Brazil is only is a smaller part. These are the 5 big guys, which will help us actually to produce the food which is lacking somewhere else, to transport it there. And they will be the same 5 in 2030, and they will be the same 5 in 2050, when you look on the large amounts. Because they have fertile soil, they have enough water, their population is not growing. We forget the water issue is because we have too many people in one place. Because more people than actually the water is there, or more people than the food is there for feeding them. So we have to think about a world market where the food can be accessed by all governments without political interference. And it needs only one case, and we had the US with Libya as the last, and before with the Soviet Union, which makes everybody using their water totally inefficiently because they don't want to become dependent on this world market. And in the future, if we want to have a good water management, our water managers have to take into account what we call the virtual water. Right. This is the food import. Then you can start to optimize the use for your local people. At the moment, this is totally disconnected. And this is also why it doesn't work, because water is in 7 or 8 different ministries and they don't talk to one another.
Try it.
Okay.
I'm
so
sure
I think these are the issues which are important for the human race to survive in dignity, the 800,000, but also the 6.5 billions.
I'm going to go to the audience. We have some questions that are coming in for you, Peter, on how do you think that a world of finite resources like water is in tune with the growth demands of capitalism? Actually, I think this question is more about capitalism than anything else, but, or let's say the underlying tenet is, capitalism shouldn't be demanding growth. But we'll leave that to be, and at least look at the first part. This came from St. Gallen, Johannes Bach, and I'll come back to you. But in the meantime, let's have a little bit of light in the audience and see if there's some questions that any of you would like to put. I can't see you very well, so il faut nous mettre un peu de lumière, s'il vous plaît, dans la salle. Ah? Un tout petit peu. I think microphone, you can see better back there, so I see one here, there we are, and one there. Vous amenez les microphones, s'il vous plaît, mesdames? Et voilà. So we'll start over here, and then I'll come to you. Yes. And as usual, introduce yourselves, please.
Christoph Stückelberger, globalethics.net, the global network on ethics based in Geneva. Thank you very much for the debate on the emotion, what Alexander Zender said. And you mentioned the religions. I think this is really one point of it's not about emotion in terms of against rationalism. It's about this deeper meaning of water as a holy entity, even in some world religions representing God or is God. So when we talk about water price, we have to take into account this dimension, that water is holy for many of the human beings, and to put a price on God is a heresy, to be extreme. Now, that's why your intervention is very important to say water services. Then it's clear, a service can have a price. So if you have a worship in a temple, you have a price for the building of the temple, so you don't violate the dignity of God. So I think we need this dialogue between world religions and this debate which is here, because the world religions have to contribute to understand and make this distinction that if we put a price on water, it does not mean violate your religious feelings.
It's
and
very,
this
very
kind of, I would suggest
yes,
that we have really, on a high level, this dialogue between world religions, and we in Global Ethics Net, we try to have this
Maggie
value
will
debate
take that into account
together with the
time.
technicians and the food producers and the water coalitions.
Good idea.
Thank you very much. Great idea. So we have a microphone here, and then let's bring a microphone. Who else wants to speak? Put up your hand. IJ, and then Claude back there, and one over here. So ladies, just keep moving the microphone along. Please. Could you speak well into the microphone?
Yes.
There we go.
Yes, there we are. My name is Jean-Benoît Charin. I work for Waterlex. One of the figures that we haven't heard during the debate, which seems to me very important, is that 80 to 90% of wastewater runs untreated into river, lakes, and the ocean. And the whole challenge about water purification starts with actually one of the biggest taboo, namely that, how we call it, the polluter pays principle does not exist. And to actually implement and do something about it, I very much like one of the comments made about the importance of having the 5 to 7 ministries talking to one another.
To one another.
I'm done.
The other question, Claude, and then we'll move over here. Yes.
Apart from the 1.5% survival, how to arbitrate between the needs for agriculture, industry,
Yes.
energy, and other sectors? Money would not be a sufficient criteria if we want to have a real balanced economic development.
That's a good question to tackle. AJ, yes.
This whole topic of discussing food and water, I think we need to have the nexus of energy as well, the cost of energy. I mean, the model you said about 5 countries
Right.
producing, and I don't dispute that, because they're going to be able to accelerate production when you need it. But there's also the cost of transporting this, and there's also the thing of food crops being grown for energy. I mean, so it's a little bit broader than that. And I think just to highlight what the Secretary General was saying, I think the biggest problem is the service delivery of water in many developing countries. We are assuming a certain level which is non-existent, and that's why you find this emotion and other arguments creeping in. But I think the nexus of energy is something we can't run away from when we're discussing food and water.
Thank you very much. Where's the next microphone? Who has it? All right. Thank you very much. And then over there you give a microphone.
My name is Annukka Lipponen. I'm from the United Nations Economic Commission for Europe, the Secretariat of UNEC Water Convention. And a number of interventions that referred to water management spoke about water services management rather. So there's a lot beyond that. There's management of water for agriculture, water for energy, and so on. And a lot of what impacts on water quality and quantity happens outside the sphere of water management. So it's a lot about policy coherence challenge also to work closely and coordinate with other sectors, agricultural policy, energy policy. Are there incentives to encourage water efficient energy generation, for example, and agricultural policy? And then there's also a part of this broader coordination need is also the transboundary coordination at the basin level regarding
Right.
water uses.
Right. There was who wanted to intervene over here, had the microphone, and then could you pass another microphone in the center here? Thank you.
Anja Grabitsky from the Global Water Partnership. We've been hearing a lot about the issues, the real life and death issues connected with water, the problems. I'm hoping that we could also hear about the solutions, and I'd like to ask the panel, how do we create shared value around water? Where are the opportunities there? What can multi-stakeholder partnerships contribute to actually help to solve some of these problems? Thank you.
Thank you. And on Twitter, we have, is water scarce, or do some have more than others, or is it just that we waste too much? All of the above, no doubt. Who has the microphone now? That's Mark de Souza. Who has the microphone? There you are, sir, please.
Jens Berggren, Stockholm International Water Institute. I love the discussion. One of the things that sort of struck me when listening to what you're saying is that there seem to be huge changes in the use of water. Food is, of course, today one of the biggest users of water, but that seems to be changing. According to the OECD Environmental Outlook, the proportion of water going to the agricultural sector will decrease from about 2/3 today to about 1/3 2050.
Right.
And the part of the economy that is where water demand is growing the most is actually in manufacturing industries. In the BRICS countries, it seems like demand for water for manufacturing will grow 8 times to 2050. So that's a huge shift in water demand. And I think we would like to sort of hear how can that affect food security, energy security, and water security on this planet.
That's very interesting. We also have with us in the audience Asit Biswas, who is a distinguished visiting professor at Lee Kuan Yew School of Public Policy, and you're also the president, I understand, Asit, of the Third World Center for Water Management. I'd like if you could pass the microphone to Professor Biswas.
The debate is interesting, but the problem with water is we have too many myths, as one of the speakers has said. For example, we heard 800 million people do not have access to safe water. My answer to that is a bunch of baloney. If you take South Asia, 1.7 billion people, I'll challenge anyone to tell me one place where people have access to clean water. The work we did, we think at least 3.6 billion people do not have access to safe water.
To safe water.
Safe water. So that is the first thing.
So in addition to just plain access to water, we're also talking about the secondary and larger problem of access to safe water. Yeah.
People have access to water.
But not to safe
Otherwise
water.
they'll be dead.
Right.
Okay? So
but
the
they are dying
is,
from non-safe water
yes.
also, yes.
So how quickly you can get it, so that's one issue.
Right.
Second, there's no universal solution to water. It varies by country by country. Countries like Mexico and India, they will not have clean water for 1,000 years if the head of the utility is changed. The average stay of a Mexican utility manager is 18 months.
Yes.
And they have no background in running a utility or running water or management expertise. The average stay of a megacities in India is about 30 to 36 months. Again, they're neither held accountable or responsible for what they do.
Well, we're coming back to the issue both of governance and of management,
yes.
which seem to be also at the core of some of our
and
problems.
One thing, I'll just say that what Peter said about Phnom Penh. Phnom Penh does not receive a single cent from the city for running its water supply. Mm-hmm. It's self-sufficient. Not only that, every year profit is going up. The poor pay, they're subsidized, but very targeted subsidy. And the rich pay for it. And if I compare Phnom Penh to London or Los Angeles, Phnom Penh, as Peter said, loses 5.2. London loses 25%.
Yeah.
And about the price, you'll be surprised to hear in Doha, in Qatar, all desalinated water, the average per capita consumption of a Qatari is 1,200 liters per person per day. Yeah. And that is after losing 1/3 of the water from the system. So when you say the people have difficulty, I have considerable difficulty to justify
to justify that, yes.
So the people have to pay. And the non-Qatari in Doha, their consumption is 150 liters per capita per day because they have to pay for it.
They have to pay for it, and it's too expensive. Thank you, Biswas. I think because we're running slowly a little bit out of time here, I think I'll leave those questions. I know that I'm sure there are many more, but let's try and address these first. So who would like to start to look at some of them? Sasha.
I would like to take the question about arbitration and wastewater together. What we have forgotten to say here on the panel, but it's now the time to do, water can be actually used twice or 3 times or 4 times. And there is a fundamental difference between agriculture and all other water uses. When you bring water to agriculture, it's gone. Not for the world, but it's gone for the local area. If you bring it into the industry or community, you have it polluted, you can clean it up and you can reuse it. So if you have to make a choice, bring first the water to the communities and the industry, make them clean up, then you can use the same water again for agriculture. Never do it the other way around, because that is not functioning. And mostly, actually, you have this discussion. You're right. People are saying, what do I have to do? You know, the food and the people and the industry, we don't give it to industry, we give it for the food. Wrong. Give it first to the industry, and then you can again use it for the
But that's again very emotional when you tell people that.
No. If you explain it to them,
but it's again you're saying you have to
explain it to them, and people are absolutely with it. It's no issue whatsoever.
Give it for making Apple computers, and then afterwards for food. You explain it.
And that's the sharing of the value, just to answer the last question.
All right.
There are many places in the world this is being done. I mean, Jordan, their wastewater is totally cleaned up and totally used in agriculture and totally exported. Orange Valley, California, takes water, cleans it up, puts it into the aquifer, and then pulls it up and uses it again. So Australia has a couple of these instances. Unfortunately, their drought didn't last long enough to get the really good policy changes, which they were on the verge of. But they've got several instances where they can do this kind of reuse. Because the gentleman who asked over here, the 90% of non-cleaned up water is more of an Asian figure than it is a global figure, but it's still absolutely shocking. And the problem is, which Sasha was leaning towards saying, is that this is a resource as well. Sweden runs some of its buses on wastewater. Most of the world now, the new wastewater treatment plants have enough energy to take the energy from the wastewater that they are treating, and that runs the wastewater treatment plant. Or it also can run the electricity needs of the communities nearby. If you treat this properly, this becomes a very real resource. And I suspect what will happen in Asia, the eternal optimist here, is that they'll do a technology leap, and this will finally be, because there's no use lecturing India about the need for wastewater treatment plants. They've had a lot of them didn't work very well, people don't want to pay the taxes, as our friend over here pointed out, and so therefore when this starts to become something viable to do, then it'll be a very good thing to do. And your ECE lady is entirely correct. When I'm talking about water services, I certainly mean water resource management services as well. I mean, that isn't just pipes, it's water, it's all of the water services that are required for the management of the resource, for measuring groundwater, metering, all of it for all uses, and the transboundary.
Thank you, Maggie. Asi, what thoughts do you want to leave us with? What would you like to see happen in the next years?
I think if we were all living in a formal world with formal governments, through exercise of citizenship, distribution of resources, to the citizens, functioning institutions, that manage and then governs, different resources, including water. I think many of the points that we've heard, from members of the panel will be totally valid, and it is about, practicing that and make sure it happens and reaches, those in need. The reality of the world is that we're not living in such a setting. There's a cohabitation between the formal setting and the informal setting. Most of the developing world, there is a center and then there's a periphery. We have big gaps and then disparities among the different groups and in the different regions we are talking about. So you did your homework and you tell me 800 million. I didn't know that was the number. But at least for me, they are the majority in my area of work. And they are the majority, in the groups, that I'm confronted with, in the regions that I'm confronted with. And for those, the paradigms are completely different. So I think what I'm learning here is, while I'm extremely strong, is my view based, just sometimes on empirical observation and then daily confrontation with those challenges. And then on the other hand, how do we then break that gap, between the formal and informal sector? Bringing better governance, bringing better management, and then making sure that the needs of those who are marginalized and hardest to reach are not considered, needs of the majority, because I don't think that, any majority will prevail if then whatever is considered to be the minority, their needs are not addressed, sufficiently. And this is where I think the needs are greatest, where the issues of talking about, paying, somebody has to pay, someone has to pay for the services, or not. But we are talking about end user here and who those end users are and where they are. So I think the table and then the image is very different.
Thank you very much. Sasha, your hope and what you would urge everyone to do rather swiftly.
It would be good to, what we have discussed, to separate the more emotional aspects from the real things which we have seen. And humanity, actually, if you look back in history, humanity grew and culture grew around water management. Look back in the big rivers, Egypt, Euphrates and Tigris, Indus, they were where actually culture started. Let's get back to that and try to create a new culture for the future by doing the water management right. And if you look around the world, I have not seen a good managed country where the water is not also very well managed. Yes. So a bad management of the water gives you also an indication how well the governance is functioning. And let's help to increase the reliability of the governance, and then the water is an automatic thing which falls in place.
A new indicator for good governance. Peter, I turn to you to close this session, and perhaps you can bring us to the creating shared value part, because that was one of the questions as well. How does creating shared value work with the water issue, and how does Nestle perhaps even look at this?
Well, I think this would be a subject by itself, but I know we have to respect the time also for our president
exactly,
to talk.
that's what I'm looking at.
I don't want to start now to open this. What I would like to finish perhaps off is on an optimistic and positive tone. Because what we all have said here at the panel at the same time was that all the problems we have today, we have solutions. Mm-hmm. This is not an issue that we cannot solve.
You're right.
We feel absolutely assured that we can find solutions for the water, for the food, and the energy security if we change the way we are managing the water. And this is the reason, because we have this solution, and by the way, not only for the 6.5 or 7.5 billion of people, up to 9.5, 10 billion, I don't think this is an issue. Mm-hmm. We can change it, but we have to change the way we are treating it. And that's the reason why we are calling very strongly to the UN that they establish in the post-2015 goals a single water-focused goal which has 4 main targets. The first one is the universal access to truly safe, and there I join, of course, ACID, not only improved water like we have it up to now, to truly safe drinking water by 2025 at the latest for everybody. The second one, I think, very important, is the access to the provision to improve sanitation to at least 120 million people every single year, so that we have a total universal access to sanitation by about 2050. It's quite long, but I think it is necessary. Then I think what has been mentioned a lot is the adequate treatment of all municipal and industrial wastewater prior to discharge, and this has to be done faster. I think we have put forward 2030. And the last one is to address the water overdraft, to find the balance between the sustainable amount of water which is there and the water we are using. Those would be the 4 things which we have been asking the UN to integrate as a single goal for the post-development goals.
Thank you very much. And exactly in this respect, first of all, I would like to ask you to thank our panelists for this session and ask you to stay seated. This is an emotional issue, and we're very glad it is, because humans are different because they're emotional, and they can make their emotions work. President Burkhalter, 2 weeks ago, during the UN General Assembly, you co-hosted a discussion on water and its importance precisely for the post-2015 development agenda. I would very much like to invite you to share with us your reflections on this discussion and on any other aspect you would like of our business of shared value. Right over here, sir. Thank you. And we can just stay here. Yeah. I'll leave you afterwards to thank him.
Well, Madam Chair, ladies and gentlemen, first of all, I would like to thank you all, dear friends of water, of emotions, and of reality. I would like to thank you all for the warm welcome beforehand. I would like to thank you also for having invited me to this forum. Sorry for having been a bit delayed before. I'm very glad to be here, and I was very glad to come, but I had to run a lot today. I've been all day long in St. Gallen, on the other side of Switzerland, for something which is using a lot of water, the agriculture exhibition, the Olma, and it was almost impossible to leave. There were so many contacts, so many people I wanted to discuss about a lot of natural products and also to drink a lot of things. Not only water, I mean milk, for instance, and apple juice and some other drink I don't want to mention here. But anyway, ladies and gentlemen, when astrophysicists look for traces of life in the outer space, what do they look for? They look for water. Water is life. Water is a finite resource which cannot be substituted. Without water, there is no health, there is no food, there is no energy, there is no social and economic development, there is no security, there is no life, and therefore water is indeed a river of emotions. Today we are moving dangerously toward towards a world without enough fresh water, something which is not matching at all with the future of life. Population growth, urbanization, growing global middle class, and changes in productions and consumption patterns, all these trends are directly impacting our water resources and related ecosystems. Climate change also adds to the challenge by increasing the frequency and intensity of extreme water events. It is about overuse, but it's not only about overuse. Diminishing water resources are also threatened by pollution. Every day, 2 million tons of sewage and waste are discharged directly into the world aquatic ecosystem. Well, in one sentence, the water crisis. This is one of the biggest challenges of the 21st century, and we, the Swiss government, we are strongly determined to look and to act also for solutions. Predictions suggest that if we do not act, demand for fresh water will increase by 50% by 2030, so in only 15 years, and by that date, demand will outstrip supply by about 40% globally. By 2050, more than half of the global population may be living under water stress, and roughly half of the world GDP may originate in water-stressed regions. The current global risk report rates the water crisis third on the list of global risks that threaten humanity. How does all this concern Switzerland? Our country is a sort of miracle. It is not only for water, it's a miracle. But about water, it is blessed with plenty of high-quality water resources. 5% of Europe's freshwater resources are located here in Switzerland. A major part of this water is stored in our beautiful lakes, above all Lake of Neuchâtel, but the one here is not bad. Also in our marvelous glaciers, also in our magic groundwater. But Switzerland is not immune to global freshwater challenges. While we import products, in particular food, that are water intensive, our service-based exports are not. This means that more than 80% of Switzerland's water footprint happens beyond our borders, often in regions where water resources are scarce. So Switzerland has an interest, but also a responsibility to contribute to resolving water issues, because this has a direct and positive impact on our economy, on our environment, and most importantly, on human beings. Contributing to resolving water problems have a direct and positive impact on people's lives. Even if water problems are local, the water crisis has a global dimension. The flood in Thailand, for instance, in 2011, showed how a local event can have an impact across the world. Global car production slowed as supply of components were cut, and world hard drive manufacturing for computers plummeted. The water crisis is not just a threat, it is a threat multiplier with implications for food, energy security, as well as political and social stability. For this reason, we, through the Swiss Agency for Development and Cooperation, we have positioned water as a global issue on a par with food security and climate change. Around 7% of Swiss official development aid is dedicated to this issue. Every year, this aid allows 1.2 million people to gain access to clean water and sanitation for the first time in their life. What is our aim? Well, we aim at a water-secure world for everyone. Because the water crisis is a global challenge, we need a global response, and the behavior of a single country cannot solve such a complex problem. Switzerland has recognized the need to foster a global commitment, accelerate action, and coordinate responses. So Switzerland wants a water-secure world for everybody, for everyone. This is why we have strongly advocated for a standalone goal on water in the very important post-2015 development agenda. Today, our coordinated efforts with partners are bearing fruit. A water and sanitation goal is among the 17 proposed Sustainable Development Goals. This goal is a result of a collective and united advocacy effort involving Swiss partners from the public and private sector and the civil society, as well as at the international level, inside and outside the United Nations, and about 100 states. This is a milestone. This is a good one, a good milestone, but it is not the final success. Negotiation will continue. They won't be very easy. Negotiation will continue until the 70th UN General Assembly and the High-Level Summit in September 2015 will adopt the new Sustainable Development Agenda, including the new set of Sustainable Development Goals. It is therefore crucial, ladies and gentlemen, it is crucial that all concerned actors continue to advocate strongly for this Sustainable Development Goal on water. One of the main advantages of the proposed water goal is that it will foster progress toward the implementation of the human right to water and sanitation. The human right to water also imposes obligations on states to progressively eliminate inequalities in access to water. This right entitled everyone to sufficient, safe, accessible and affordable water for essential personal and domestic uses. We talk about 50 to 100 liters per person per day, depending on the region, but also on specific individual needs. This does not mean that water and sanitation, or water services, if you prefer, should be delivered for free or at highly subsidized price. But the tariff must be fair and within reach of the poorest, and we just heard some ideas about that for achieving that beforehand. The private sector must bear its share of responsibility for ensuring the human right to water. Business enterprises should respect and promote this right. They should avoid infringing on the human rights to water of others, and they should address human rights impacts in which they are involved. Another benefit of defining water as a sustainable development goal is that it will foster better and more effective water governance. And this point is really very important to me, also that's chairperson in office of the Organization of Security and Cooperation in Europe. The situation in each catchment basin is different. Different countries and different catchment basins, even in the same region, face very different problems. Therefore, stakeholders' dialogues and formal and informal governance are key, including for resolving disputes and ensuring equitable compensation. The business sector must be part of such a dialogue. Competition over water resources can be particularly destabilizing in catchment basins that cross political boundaries. This is why it is so important that the proposed water goal advocate transboundary cooperation. In fact, our main water resources are transboundary. The world's 263 transboundary lakes and river basins cover nearly half of the Earth's land surface, and the territory of a total of 145 nations is included in international basins. Concrete challenges for transboundary bases that warrant a close cooperation are, for example, the construction of big dams in upstream countries or the competition between hydropower and agriculture. In past years, warning of potential water wars have grown louder. Geopolitical tensions over access to strategic resources could have a systematically greater impact, and water shortages coupled with poverty and societal instability could undermine the cohesion of states or fuel interstate conflict. And we have enough of them. But experience has shown that the need for water sharing can also generate cooperation. There are also very positive aspects. Despite the complexity of the problem, water sharing can become a field of collaboration in conflict situations. With this positive vision, Switzerland is engaged in the so-called blue diplomacy. We have become particularly active in the development of new mechanisms for water policy negotiation and coordination in order to promote diplomacy over surface water and groundwater in Africa, in Asia, in Latin America. For instance, we are supporting efforts to strengthen good governance and management mechanisms in 15 transboundary river basins worldwide, including in the wider Middle East. Our engagement in water diplomacy relies on the long-standing experience Switzerland has in transboundary water cooperation, for instance, in the Rhine Basin, one of the most important cultural and economic axes in Europe. And Switzerland is keen to share this experience. One of our most recent initiatives is the twinning of Lake Geneva and Lake Titicaca. As both are transboundary lakes, the twinning aims at sharing the 10 years experiences of the International Commission for the Protection of Lake Geneva. Experience in the realm of multilateral environmental agreement has told us how important intergovernmental processes are for predictability and confidence building. In this context, we strongly welcome the fact that the Water Convention of the UN Economic Commission for Europe, that we have implemented with our neighbors for many decades, is now turning into a global legal framework for transboundary water cooperation, and we encourage members states outside the UNECE region to join it. We are also building up a hub of competence in Geneva to promote water cooperation and good governance and to prevent or resolve water conflicts. This hub will promote partnerships with international think tanks as well as with UN and non-UN institutions and agencies. It will build on Switzerland's experience as well on the wealth of international water actor presence in Geneva, and the hub will further strengthen Geneva as the capital for peace. While governments have a responsibility for the design and implementation of policies and regulations, civil society and the private sector also have a key role to play. The public and the private sector have a shared responsibility for ensuring a water-secure world for everyone. This is why Switzerland is engaged in several public-private partnerships. One example is our work on the water footprint. At the global level, we have supported the adoption of an ISO standard on the water footprint. In the field, the Swiss Development Agency is closely cooperating with a dozen of leading companies as well as with national government and NGOs to reduce the water footprints of production systems. For instance, in Vietnam, the world's biggest producer of Robusta coffee, we are working with Nestlé and the Ministry of Agriculture. The partnership at first produced a scientific study showing that the quantity of water used for irrigation could be reduced by up to 60%. That was the first step. Corresponding efforts will now be applied with 50,000 farmers. This will lead to significant savings of production costs for the coffee farmer. In terms of water resources, it will save the equivalent of the water needs of 2.5 million people. Another initiative in which we are involved, again with Nestlé, is the 2030 Water Resource Group, which is an innovative public-private civil society partnership conceived within the World Economic Forum and hosted by the World Bank Group. This initiative was founded on the understanding that government, the private sector and civil society have a common interest in the sustainable management of water resources. This innovative approach has already brought positive results in a number of countries. For example, in South Africa, public-private partnership has been initiated for wastewater management between upstream mining companies and downstream municipalities. In Mongolia, a multi-stakeholder working group is designing comprehensive incentives such as tax reform or innovative practices that will be fed into the water law. Well, to wrap up, ladies and gentlemen and dear friends, you have raised the question whether we can resolve the challenge of water scarcity. The projections are dire, but my answer is simple. We must and we can. Business as usual is not an option. Our well-being, our economic wealth, and our survival depend on our capacity to act and to deal with the water crisis. The cost of inactions are disproportionately higher than the cost of action, and the longer we wait, the more expensive it will get. Switzerland is very motivated. The Swiss government is committed to addressing the water challenge. It is in fact a priority of our foreign policy. We must know all muster the will to give ourselves the policy tools to deal with this challenge. An important way forward will be first an ambitious water sustainable development goal. Moreover, as a second type of tool, technical solutions are available and in many cases not expensive. For instance, last year, a report of the Water Resource Group showed that plugging leaks at an existing water supply system can address water scarcity 50 to 100 times more cost effectively than building an expensive water treatment plant. There are also, third point, clear opportunities in terms of job creation, innovation and economic growth. And fourth, at the political level, dialogue and mediation capacities will be key to resolving water-related challenges and threats. Fifth, finally, this has to be a collective effort. Cooperation among states and public-private partnerships are essential. Caring together about water today with emotion and beyond emotion is the best and cheapest way of guaranteeing clean water for the future. Governments, citizens, the private sector can contribute to a water-secure world for everyone. We need to do it now, and we owe it to the very next generation. Thanks a lot, and good evening.
Well, Mr. President, once more on behalf of everybody here, thank you very much. First of all, for having joined us, for having listened to the panel, to listen to the different intervention, the tweeters. I think it was quite interesting to see that the subject is high on the agenda by everybody all over the world. And for us, of course, it's extremely important to see how personally you are involved in this question about the water and the issue that we have. You personally, you as the president of the Swiss Confederation, the Swiss government, and the development agencies, and you mentioned it, I mean, we were extremely thankful that the Swiss government allowed the development agency to be a founder member of the Water Resource Group. It's not as obvious, frankly speaking, especially when you have Nestle involved at the same time. But it opened the door for many other development agencies from many other countries to join. Once they have seen Switzerland joining, they felt that this was serious, and therefore it was a great help for us in order to establish well this Water Resource Group. And again, another good example, I think, of the openness of the Swiss government that you mentioned about the collaboration we are doing in Vietnam on the farmer side. So I would just wanted to say once more, thank you very much for all of this. We will be your ambassador, as you know. You gave me the opportunity to talk to all the Swiss ambassadors about the water issue just recently in Lugano. And we are, in this respect, your ambassador, trying to do the best that we get water really as a single point up to the SDGs next time. So thank you once more.
Thanks to you.
You are welcome to stay, but I know that you have a helicopter to take, and it's getting dark. So I think you have to leave.
They can fly in the dark as well.
I will say
Gentlemen, will you take your places? Thank you, President. And now, ladies and gentlemen, for our closing. Listening intently to the discussion today has been Mukisa Kitui, who is Secretary General of UNCTAD, the United Nations Conference on Trade and Development, and has co-organized today's event with Nestle. Secretary General, I'd like to invite you to the stage, and I'd like to invite Nestle CEO Paul Bulcke to join you. Vous mettez ça chez Monsieur Bulcke. I'm looking to see if we're all sitting in the right places. Thank you, Secretary General. So we've come to the end of our meeting. Thank you very much for joining us for this last session. And I know that in a few days, UNCTAD's World Investment Forum will take place, and I believe many of us are going to see each other again there. And it's really particularly focusing on how businesses can invest in sustainable development goals. So I'd just like to ask you the impossible task, Secretary General. Between what has happened here, many of us are involved in and very interested also in the UNCTAD World Investment Forum. So we're going to go from here to there. Can you make that link for us, please?
Well, thank you very much. First of all, I want to thank Nestle, Paul and Peter, for your effort, for your leadership, and this very, very important exercise. One of the main things that we're concentrating on next week is how can we scale up the ownership of initiatives on sustainability from the private sector. While the process of creating the post-2015 agenda has been driven by governments in the UN, we know that the main players on investing in sustainability are coming from the private sector. The fact that this meeting here has been about how to raise ambition on creating shared value sets the stage very well for the issues that we want to continue. We want to build on the momentum you're building here. To what level can there be raised ambition within industry to find a consistency between the objectives of industry and aspirations of society? If you answer that question, you have answered the question of how can we find a growing attention to investing in sustainability sectors. So that's one. The second thing that's very important to us is the process you're involved in, multi-stakeholder. That I overheard a discussion how in choosing where to go, you have been following areas where civil society is located to go and hold meetings there, where enterprises are, to get them on board and enrich the dialogue. For us, the exercise of addressing investing in sustainable development requires very urgently that the voices of civil society, of academia, of the business community, of government agencies and governments and UN agencies are brought together in a very, very workable way. And I think that is something we're learning from your practice here. And finally, I'll just return to the most important thing. You are addressing the question of creating shared value. The Sustainable Development Agenda, the SDGs, is about creating value for inclusion of those who are otherwise being left behind. You set the stage for us to say, we are defining the value. How do we now create the sharing culture? How do we internalize the collective objectives as part of our agenda? Governments can say it, but without enterprise internalizing it, cannot be possible. That's why you represent such an important gateway to what we want to discuss next week.
Well, I think that fairly well makes that link between it. But do you have any question for the Secretary General in this respect? You're going to be coming at all to the UNCTAD meeting?
No, Nestle is going to be there.
I can't. But Nestle will be there strongly, I think.
And we're going to put it higher on the agenda for next year. So definitely. But now, also looking at the time, very short. I think this 6th Creating Shared Value Global Forum was there to provoke a thinking process or develop further thinking process. And actually, the title started with provoking and the changing role of business, and actually then connecting with the changing role of governments also in the same equation, and civil society in general. But there's, at the end of the day, the creating shared value concept or way of thinking is not something new. I want to stress that again. It is something that should wake up an awareness of the fundamental role of economic activity in society. And I have mentioned it at the beginning of the day that when business or the economic activity thinks in long-term perspectives and does that with a set of values, and I mentioned it linked with respect, what it does should create value for society at large. It should connect. And there's learning process for society, and there's new data coming in there. But today we have developed the 3 areas basically where we are focusing on as a company. But there's other areas, and every company, every stakeholder should define where they interact more meaningfully with society and how they can be part of the solution. But we spoke about nutrition and health. We spoke about food securities and sustainable agriculture, and then water. And apart from the dimension that you always feel in every part of it, emotional and rational. And emotional is always part of human beings, but the rational dimension should also be there, very, very preeminent. But also there was a certain trend always to bring it back to emerging or developing markets. And that is because creating shared value is much more obvious there. Yet at the same time, the developed markets are developed because of the same dynamics that are linked with creating shared value. Just to use an example of creating shared value, how a company like Nestle can create shared value in Europe, for example, we have been quite visible on the Nestle needs youth. The unemployment of youth, for example, is a huge issue. Not only in the developed world, also in the emerging and developing world, but in Europe, definitely, when you have countries of 50-60% of youth unemployment, this is not a statistic. This is a time bomb, a social time bomb. And there again, a company like Nestle and many others, we committed to say, let's in the next 2-3 years, we're gonna engage with 20,000 young people in Europe. 10,000 new hires, but also 10,000 apprenticeships, because then they have a swing towards a job, a potential swing to a job. And we have extended that now a few days ago with a partnership with many other companies, 200 plus companies, linking up to that. It is clear that we are focused on Europe. That's definitely something we're going to extend to the world, because we are in all these parts of the world. But you see, again, is that philanthropy? That's not philanthropy. That's basically also a company thinking in context, long-term thinking, and seeing how these actions are creating positive environments also for us long term. And that's the fundamental thing, concept of creating shared value. It is that what the company is all about and how we go about business should be done in such a way that whatever we do, our success is linked with a successful society. And that is that awareness that creates this, I would say, compellingness in the concept of creating shared value. Now that I have the mic, I want to say a few thanks to you too, because we are running out of time, I know, and you're looking at me. But I want, first of all, thank you, Secretary General Kitui, for through your organization being part of this whole day and have partnered and co-coordinated this day of today. So thank you for that, and I hope this has been a little bit of warming up for what's coming next week for you, with quite a huge audience where we have part of the changing role of governments, because you're going to have quite a few people who can make a difference in their countries. I want to thank also all the panelists of today, who have done a marvelous job of giving us insights and bringing authority and thought leadership in many of the issues. And so thank you all. Also, I want to thank and congratulate again our prize winners there, and saying how we are ourselves motivated by what you do. But then I want to also a special thank you to you, Maria. Maria, you have done again an outstanding, superb job in moderating us through the day. You have done it with this gentle firmness. I don't know if that's responsible leadership, but if it's effective leadership, I can tell you. And so I really want to thank you for again having made this day even more productive than it is normally. So thank you very much, and congratulations.
Thank you very much, Paul. It was my pleasure as always. I learn so much. Every time we do this, there's something new. I want to thank you particularly, Secretary General, for being with us. I know you're in the middle of some of the most enormous preparations, and many of us will be joining. May I also acknowledge everyone who's online. Apparently there are some thousands online, and I want to acknowledge their questions and anything that did not get answered, I have been assured will be coming in the following days. Thank you, Paul, for your kind words.